It's a pleasure to be here. I'm, as mentioned, interested in urban science, but I'm interested in a lot of areas of science that are being affected by crowdsourcing. And I'm going to tell you about some work we've done on a tool, an open source tool for crowdsourcing science with Danielle Lombrania Gonzalez, my colleague at the Citizen Cyber Science Center at CERN. So something about citizen science and citizen cyber science. So citizen science has been around, long before Twitter and Facebook, long before the web and even the internet. People were going out and measuring things. There have been amateur archaeologists, amateur astronomers, ornithologists, making significant contributions to what we would consider the body of academic science through their observations and activities. With the advent of the internet and the web in particular, we see suddenly a shift, an explosion actually, of opportunities for ordinary people, non-professional scientists, amateurs, to contribute in a real and meaningful way to research, cutting-edge research. This is what I call citizen cyber science. And I deliberately show a young Chinese woman because, in fact, that's the big opportunity in citizen cyber science at the moment. We have quite a lot of, several million people contributing, but most of them are young men in North America and Europe. But actually the shift of balance now is towards Asia. There are more people online in China than there are people in the United States now. And we think there's a great opportunity for citizen cyber science in China, India, and Africa. I'm just going to give you some examples. I mean, this goes back a long way. SETI at home. Hands up whoever loaded SETI at home on their desktop. Okay, a few people. So SETI at home was a project launched in 1999, mind you, to get people to download some software that runs some simulations to study radio astronomical signals and look for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. And there has been no discovery yet, but over 1 million people have downloaded this and participated. This is from a group at Berkeley, David Anderson. And this project really, it's fascinating. It has many of the elements that we now associate with successful crowdsourcing. There's a credit system, points for all the processing you do. There are fora where people share information, help each other, learn about the software, learn about the science. All of that was going on, well before Facebook, but in a very narrow community of interest. Then a few years later, this opened up to other forms of participation in science. One famous example, poster child of this, is Galaxy Zoo. So here, instead of using your processor, they're asking you to use your brain to do a pattern recognition problem that a computer finds relatively hard, and that is to say whether a particular galaxy image that's been harvested automatically is spiral or elliptical. And there have been some significant discoveries made by people in the community when they see pictures that are neither spiral or elliptical and mention it, and eventually the scientists who are managing this have found out, oh, we don't even know what that is. And then more recently with mobile devices and smartphones in particular, there's been this renaissance of what you could say is classical citizen science, but in this new mode, digital mode. So Project Noah, developed by Yasser Ansari, a NYU ITP student here, who spun this off as a company, is essentially the classical citizen science ornithologist on the iPhone. And it's not just ornithology, it's any bird or plant that you might be interested in. Take a picture of it, upload it. I do this with my daughter on the way to school, and within half an hour, someone out there who's an amateur has put up the Latin name of that squirrel and some information about it, where you can find more background about the animal. And if you do well and you upload lots of pictures and people are interested, you get virtual badges, and they put a lot of effort into the design of these badges, so there's some real motivation to join. And as you can see, people get so obsessed they actually tattoo Project Noah badges on themselves. High-risk thing to do if they change their design. Anyway, what these projects have in common, though, is this sort of top-down. Someone's designed the whole project, typically a scientist, and they're asking the crowd to help them. I had a fellowship a while ago to go around the world and try and convince scientists in developing regions that citizen cyber science was something for them. It's a low-cost approach to doing science. I didn't have much success from formal professor-type scientists, but I have a lot of interest from activists and people who are trying to create knowledge from the bottom up. And as a result of that, with Danielle and with the Open Knowledge Foundation and the support of the Shuttleworth Foundation, we started a project called Crowdcrafting. And this is a simple web service. It's based entirely on open source tools. And the idea is you should be able to set up your own citizen cyber science project easily. And this is really based on the feedback that many people don't need 1 million people or even 100,000 people to help them with their research. Even a couple of hundred people over a weekend can do a lot of research. That's like 1 man year of a PhD. It's really valuable, right? But the tools that have been developed for these big projects are not well suited to that. So I'm not going to take you through all the things that Crowdcrafting does. I'm going to focus in on a couple of examples that students, master's students at CUSP, who had no background in this before, have been doing. So under Crowdcrafting, there's a number of tools. One of them is called PIBossa. PIBossa is Python-based, as you can guess, and it's a framework for creating these what we call volunteer thinking projects, where we ask people to analyze images or digitize text or whatever it is that we need them to do. And it's totally open source. You can go and use it right away. A lot of people are doing that. And so here's one of my students, Nick Johnson, a master's student. He's fascinated by trash. If you're living in New York, you can't get around it sometimes. It's everywhere. And the question is, where does it go, right? And it turns out it doesn't go to any landfill in New York or even in New York State. It's trucked to places like South Carolina, to landfills there. So he got really interested in where are all these landfills around the US and how much space do they occupy. And all he could find was a data set, EPA data set, with coordinates of landfills. But that didn't really say much at all. So he's taken that data set and he's invited the crowd to help him try and figure out where all these landfills are, what state they're in, are they active, and so on. So this is just one example of a picture from Crowdcrafting. The red kite there is the position that the EPA data set says is a landfill. And what the person has done next to it is they've seen where the landfill is in the satellite images. These could be Google images. It happens to be Bing in this case. The person has made an estimate of what they think the landfill is. And of course, as usual, you don't trust one person, one person's data. You ask 20 or 30 people to look at this, and then you take some reasonable average of what they think both the size and the status of this landfill is, right? So we're already with the preliminary data estimating that the total landfill area of the US is several times larger than New York, which, if you think about it, is amazing. I know the US is big, but it's still amazing. Another project at CUSP is we have people, we actually hired astronomers to take to analyze pictures taken every 30 seconds of the New York skyline. Why? Because the pattern of lights going on and off has a lot of rich information in it. This is big data analysis. That's what CUSP is really there to do. It's an urban informatics institution. And we're learning things about, for example, the average sleep pattern of New Yorkers looking at these lights. Or energy, how energy is being used, a proxy for energy being your lighting system. Okay? But there's a problem for this one astronomer is, in his field of view, the pictures, he has 20,000 windows and he has to tag by hand, which one's a window and a lamp and so on. It's extremely time consuming. Again, why not ask the crowd? So a couple of master's students set up a project to do this. And you can see what they've done is, you don't ask the crowd or you don't ask individuals to tag 20,000 windows at once. Everybody gives up. You give them a small field of view and ask them to look at a few windows. And what the students did, which was the innovation here, which was surprising, is just using this tool, they realized that they could flip back and forth between nighttime and daytime images of the same scene, and that made it much easier to identify what was a light and what wasn't. Okay? So again, a very simple tool. This is not going to require tens of thousands of people, maybe only 100 people. We can probably do it internally in CUSP, and we may want to do it internally for privacy reasons. So this is a tool that can be used in many different ways. Okay, it is being used in many different ways and by all kinds of people. So we're discovering projects, there's several hundred projects now on crowdcrafting. Some of them are just tests and people fooling around. But here's a group that came in and used it, didn't ask us anything about what they were doing, made a very beautiful project. They're called SkyTruth. They're a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to using available imagery, satellite imagery, to discover what mining and oil companies are doing to mess up the face of the US. Okay? So they're looking at these pads of the fracking industries and asking the question, you can get open data sets of where these pads are, but what state they're in. Is it just still virgin forest? Have they started to build? Is there some equipment there? So, oops, sorry. This is what the crowdcrafting page looks like. So you're asked to say no pad visible, bare pad, pad with equipment, and so on. And they built in, this is part of the functionality of crowdcrafting, a whole training module. So if you guess wrong, it'll tell you, sorry, wrong, and you improve gradually. And when you reach a certain level of prowess in identifying these things, you're let loose on other data they have. This is nothing new. There's a lot of projects that have done this, but we're making the tools open so that anyone else can use these approaches. This is the results they're getting. So this is Pennsylvania, and they now have a sort of deep data set of which pads are active, which are still under development, and so on. So this is the open information they're able to release. We have groups of people in Iceland who are interested in analyzing Icelandic legal documents to see the relationship between whether judges were right-wing and left-wing and whether they incarcerated people. They came, they had thousands of documents analyzed within 3 days, and they left. They never asked us for anything. They just used the tools and went on. Worked out very well for them, and we eventually figured that out when we used Google Translate to read the Icelandic press. Okay, so I wanted to, since we're in a business school, we've been able to do this thanks to the generosity of some foundations that are very far-seeing, the Shuttleworth Foundation, Sloan Foundation, the Open Society Foundations. But I personally don't believe that there should be a world in which everything just survives academically on handouts from nice foundations. There should be a business model behind open source if it's valuable. And so we're testing out a freemium model. So if you have a project, come and use crowdcrafting. If you want to do 100 projects and you have tens of thousands of images you want analyzed, you're going to have to pay for that, because there are some costs. We're doing this in the cloud, but the cloud costs something, and so on. And what we discovered as a really useful business model is we have many people ring us up and say, hey, we really want to do this and that. And we would say to them, these are companies, institutions like museums and so on. We'd say to them, well, go ahead, the software's there. And they'd say, yeah, but how much? How much to do it? They don't want to mess around with open source software. They just want you to produce a product. And so we're now doing that, a sort of bespoke solution. And here's one example that was just launched by the British Museum. And so they've got a whole thing going now of getting people to help them with their research on all the artifacts they have in the museum. And they're actually proposing a sort of multi-tier thing. You can help them with the research. You can help them to fund the research. And then what I think is really exciting is you can tell them what sort of research they ought to be doing. You can contribute, as it were, to the whole process of research. And I think that's the really exciting direction of crowdsourcing in science, is when we go bottom up in asking the questions, having the crowd ask questions about science, right? I think that this is really going to shake up the academic system. So I invite you to try crowdcrafting if you have a problem like that. It's under development. We're launching new parts of it. We'll have volunteer computing components. We'll have we already work with a project called EpiCollect for collecting data on phones and then feeding it into crowdcrafting. So try it out, have fun with it, tell us what doesn't work, and it'll get better. Thank you.